Good afternoon, and we are living with light, the why behind the what. And today I want to discuss the upcoming fast day of Asara B'Teves, the 10th of Teves, which is coming up on Tuesday. And I think it's one of those fasts that we don't know so much about. And hopefully by the end of today's class, we'll know at least a little bit more about it. So, So what do we know about the 10th of Teves? So let's begin with a verse in the book of Zechariah. And Zechariah is a prophet who lived after the destruction of the first temple, beginning of the second temple. And and he has the following word from Hashem. Vahi dvar Hashem tzvakos elai lemor. The word of Hashem came to me saying, this is the first source in the source sheet. Ko amar Hashem tzvakos. So says Hashem, the Lord of hosts. Tzom haravi, the fast, the fourth fast. V'tzom hachamishi, in the fifth fast. V'tzom hashvi, in the seventh fast. V'tzom hasiri, in the 10th fast. Yelaves yudalas asam l'simcha l'madim tovim. They'll become days of joy. They'll become days of joy with the rebuilding of the second temple. So then the fasts that were enacted over the destruction of the first temple will be turned into days of joy. That's the verse in Zechariah. And the question is, what are these fasts that are referred to in the verse? What is the fourth fast? What is the fifth fast? What is the seventh fast? And what is the 10th fast? So this is the subject of a dispute in the Gemara between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva. Really, they'd only dispute one of those, which is what we're talking about today. But the Gemara says as follows, it's in Rosh Hashanah 18b, and the Gemara says, Tanya Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon taught, Arba Devarim Hayi Rabbi Akiva Darish. There were four things that Rabbi Akiva darshan, he elucidated, he expounded, and I don't agree with him. And this is going to be one of them. So what is that? So Rabbi Akiva said the following. He said that Som Haravi, the fast of the fourth, is Tisha B'Tammuz, is the 9th of Tammuz. So we don't actually fast on the 9th of Tammuz. We fast on the 17th of Tammuz. It's a discussion for another time about what day our enemies break into Yerushalayim. We'll call it the Babylonians for now. Again, it's also a question of first temple, second temple, but this verse would be referring to the first temple, the month of Tammuz, summertime. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the first fast of the summer is the 9th of Tammuz. We do it on the 17th, but okay. Then you have, so that's the fourth fast, means the fourth month. So if you start counting the months from Nisan, so Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Tammuz is the fourth month. So the fourth fast, or the fast of the fourth, would be the fast that's in Tammuz, which according to Rabbi Akiva is the 9th. Okay. Then you have Tzom HaChamishi, the fast of the fifth. What's the fifth month? Av. That is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. Shebo Nisraf Beis Elokim, that's the day that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Tzom HaShavi, the fast of the seventh month. The seventh month following Nisan is going to be Tishrei. We have a fast in Tishrei the day after Rosh Hashanah, the 3rd of Tishrei, Zeshlosha B'Tishrei, Shebo Nera Gedalia Ben Achikam. That was the day that Gedalia was killed. That's Tzom Gedalia. Gedalia was like the last vestige of hope that they could rebuild the Beis HaMikdash after it was destroyed. So that's, again, a discussion for Tishrei time. And now we come to our topic. Tzom HaAsiri, what is the fast of the 10th? So, Rabbi Akiva continuing, Ze Asara B'Teves, that's the 10th of Teves. What happened on the 10th of Teves? Shebo Samach Melech Bavel al Yerushalayim. That's the day that the king of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, was Samach. Here they translate laid siege. Samach means he drew near. He laid siege to Jerusalem on the 10th of Teves. And it quotes a verse, and we're going to see another verse also in a moment, but It quotes a verse from the book of Yechezkel. Vayidvar Hashem Elai b'shanat hashis b'chodesh ha'asiri b'asar chodesh lemor. Yechezkel says, the word came to me in the ninth year. Talk about that in a moment. On the 10th, in the 10th month, on the 10th of the month. Asara b'teves, the 10th day of the 10th month is the 10th of Teves, and Yechezkel, who is not in Jerusalem even, he's I think already in Babylonia. He's already been exiled. That there was a pre-exile exile before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Many people were sent into exile, and Yechezkel's there, and he gets a prophecy, and the prophecy says that Ben Adam, oh man, Ksavach Hashem Hayom Etzem Hayom Hazeh Salach Babel Yerushalayim. You should write the name of the day of this same day. The king of Babylonia has laid siege to Jerusalem on this very day. So Yechezkel receives a prophecy that right now there's a siege going on in Jerusalem, or that today the siege has begun on Jerusalem on the 10th day of the 10th month, which is the 10th of Teves. Why is it called the 10th fast? The fast of the 10th? Amai kari le'asiri, asir le'chadashim. It's the 10th month. Okay, so we have that on the 9th of Tammuz, there was the breach of the walls. That's the first thing listed in the verse. On the 10th, on the 9th of Av, the Beis Hamikdash, the temple was destroyed. On the 3rd of Tishrei, Gedaliah ben Achikam was killed. And on the 10th of Teves, on the 10th of the 10th month, the last thing listed in the verse, they laid siege to Yerushalayim. Now, chronologically, that's out of order, because the siege happened before the destruction, and yet, according to this, it's listed last. Okay, so why is it listed in this order? Ask the Gemara. Because it's going in the order of the months that the fasts occur. So the first fast is in the 4th month, the second fast is in the 5th month, the next one is in the 7th month, and the last one is in the 10th month, even though what it commemorates happened first, it's listed out of order. That was Rabbi Akiva's understanding. Says Rabbi Shimon that Ani Omer came, but I don't say that. Rather, what is the fast of the 10th? Tzom Asiri. Zechamisha b'Teves. It's the 5th of Teves. Shebo ba shmua lagola shehuchtar huchtsahair. That's the day that word reached the people in exile that the city of Jerusalem had been destroyed. So Jerusalem was destroyed. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on the 9th of Av. It took time for word to reach the Jews in exile, a number of months apparently. Maybe things were quite chaotic. By the time they found out, it wasn't until the 5th of Teves. And that is when, that according to Rabbi Shimon is what is being referred to here in this verse. The Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 10th, is the 5th of Teves, because that's the day that word reached the people in Babylonia that the Beis Hamikdash had been destroyed. And Rabbi Shimon then goes on, he says, I like my approach better than Rabbi Akiva's approach, which makes sense. That's why it's his approach. But fine. So we have here two different understandings of what the fast of the 10th is that's being referenced in this verse in Zechariah. There's a reference to something called Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 10th. And Rabbi Akiva says it's the 10th of the 10th month, Asara b'Teves, which is the day that the Babylonians laid siege to Jerusalem. And Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon says that that would be out of order chronologically. He wants it to be in order, in chronological order. So he says no, what we fast for, or what the verse is referring to at least, as the fast in the 10th month is on the 5th day of the 10th month, which is the day that the people in exile found out about the destruction of the temple. And he describes that was like the day of destruction. When they heard about it, it was like it was being destroyed for them, and therefore that became a fast day. Okay, and he wants it to be in chronological order. Okay, so that's just a little introduction. Yeah, Robert.
It's like if you hear about an immediate relative dying more than 30 days after the death, you observe a little bit of mourning then. So it's still, uh, even though it's a day that's not anyway in any way related to the death or burial, you observe it then.
Okay. Okay. Now, what would Rabbi Akiva say back? Rabbi Shimon is making a good point. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's true it's in the order of the months, but the list is out of chronological order. It's a little bit strange that it's out of chronological order. So let's hold that question a moment and come back to it. And but let's talk a little bit more. So we quoted a verse from the Gemara quoted a verse from Yechezkel that Yechezkel had a prophecy while in exile that said, today the Babylonians have laid siege to Jerusalem. We also have another source, interesting the Gemara didn't bring it, but we have an explicit verse in the book of Kings 2, Melachim Beis, and it's the first thing on the second side of the source sheet. It says there, Vayhi bishnas hatashiyis v'malcho. It was in the ninth month of his kingship. So the king at the time of the destruction, his name was Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu was the king, and it was the ninth month of his reign. Um, his reign was never like such a serious reign. He was like a puppet king to he was Jewish, but he was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. Um, and it was in the ninth year of his reign, Bachodesh HaAsiri, in the 10th month, Be'asar Lachodesh, on the 10th day, Ba Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel, came, the king of Babylonia, Hu v'chol al Yerushalayim, he and his entire army on Jerusalem, Vayichan Aleha, um, sorry, actually, I misspoke. There was a rebellion that they had reclaimed. They had reclaimed some autonomy from the Babylonians, I believe. Let me just remind myself, just so I don't say the wrong thing. Um, no, I said the right thing. There had previously been a rebellion, but that was already quashed. And so I don't remember the exact history of why now, if Babylonia has already, established themselves as rulers over the Jewish people. So somehow though the Jewish people have managed to create a stronghold in Yerushalayim still, in Jerusalem, but now it's coming to an end. So the Nebuchadnezzar comes, it says, he came, Vayichar Aleha, and he encamped around it, Vayivna Aleha Dayik Saviv, and they built siege machines around it, ramps and stuff, to lay siege to Jerusalem. Now, this siege would go for a long time, it would go for over 2 years before they broke through. Um, but it begins on the 10th of Teves. And here we have explicitly in Melachim Beis not just a prophecy that Yechezkel is receiving while in exile, but actually the 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 prophet here is recording it, in real time, so to speak, that as it's happening. And okay, and as I mentioned, they lay siege for about 2 years, and they break through in the month of Tammuz, and they destroy the Beis Hamikdash in the month of Av. Now, in this verse, if you read it carefully, um, actually the next verse, the verse from Yechezkel. So when Yechezkel receives his prophecy, Hashem says to him, God says to him in verse 2, chapter 24, verse 2 of Yechezkel, um, write the name of this day as Etzem Hayom Hazeh, like this very day, that on this very day, the Babylonians have laid siege to Jerusalem. That's the prophecy that Yechezkel receives. Now, based on that word, this very day, the one of the early commentators, the Rav David Abu Draham, records a tradition. I don't think he's the only one to say this, but he's the one that's quoted in the halachic works, that there's something unique about the 10th of Teves as a fast day. And that is that if the 10th of Teves were to fall out on a Shabbos, you would still fast the fast of the 10th of Teves. Now, it doesn't happen. The way that our calendar is coordinated, it can't actually happen. But in a different system where in its original system where they again it's kind of a hypothetical because we probably won't have to fast this fast day once we get the normal system back. But in our system, we who have the calendar say it can't actually happen. But theoretically speaking, if it could, and Asara B'Teves, the 10th of Teves would fall on Shabbos, you would fast on Shabbos. That's what the Avudraham says, and others disagree. But that position needs to be understood. Why is the 10th of Teves unique that you would fast even on Shabbos? By the way, the 10th of Teves can fall out on a Friday. It's the only fast that can fall out on a Friday, and we do fast when it falls out on a Friday. Other fasts get moved if they were to be on a Friday, like the um, Tzom Gedalia. I mean, it the not Tzom Gedalia. Um, can Tzom Gedalia be a Friday? No, it can't. But Tainus Esther sort of could be the fast right before Purim. So if Purim is on a Sunday, then Tainus Esther is on Shabbos, and but we don't fast on Shabbos, and we don't push it back to Friday. We push it all the way back to Thursday. Okay, but Asar B'Tevis can actually fall out on a Friday, and it did either last year or the year before. I don't remember, but the question is, why is the 10th of Teves special that we would fast even if it were to fall out on Shabbos? And he derives it from this word be'etzem. Be'etzem, um, like on this very day, he seems to think is like it has to be on this day. You can't move it. That's the implication according that's what he understands from that word be'etzem is that it's on this very day. You can't move it to a different day. You can't push it off. So why? Why? And just for example, the ninth of Av could fall out on Shabbos, but we don't fast if the ninth of Av falls out on Shabbos. We push it off till Sunday, Tisha B'av, the day the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Seemingly the worst day of the year, and we won't fast on Shabbos if it falls out on Shabbos. The calendar does allow for it. We'll push it off till Sunday, and yet the Avudraham says that if the 10th of Teves were to fall on Shabbos, we would fast on Shabbos. So, so one explanation is that the beginning of a calamity is the worst. Um, we have this, the B'nai Yissaschar quotes this, brings this idea, brings a proof from actually something relating to Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av, the the Beis Hamikdash mostly burned on the 10th of Av. And yet we fast on the 9th of Av. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan said that if I was living in that generation, I would have established the fast on the 10th of Av, because that's when the Beis Hamikdash actually finished burning. So, and they only set fire to the Beis Hamikdash in the afternoon of the 9th. So the 9th is like you know, barely Tisha B'Av almost, the 9th. I mean, Tisha B'Av means the 9th of Av, but it was only towards the end of Tisha B'Av of the 9th of Av that they set fire to the temple. So Rabbi Yochanan says if I had been in that generation, I would have established the fast on the 10th of Av. So the Gemara says, why didn't they? What were the sages, what did they have in mind to establish it on the 9th? The Gemara says, "Ischalta de puranusa adifa." The main thing is the beginning of a calamity. That's the worst part, and the therefore, in a certain sense, the 10th of Teves is worse than Tisha B'Av, because the 10th of Teves is the beginning of the calamity, really the beginning. When the Babylonians lay siege to Yerushalayim. And that siege is held for 2 years, finally leading to them breaking through the walls of Jerusalem and destroying the temple. The beginning is when they lay siege, and therefore that's the worst, and therefore we would even fast on Shabbos. since it's the beginning is is the worst of all. That's what the Bnei Yissaschar says. Now, to maybe build on that idea, the Chassam Sofer says that um,
What's the question?
the Chassam Sofer says that
Excuse me, Rabbi.
yeah,
a comment, a
yeah,
question, a comment. If you take the 17th of Thomas,
yeah,
okay, there were several things that happened on that day. Not just one, not
yeah,
just that the Romans, and getting back to the 9th of Thomas, my understanding was that the Babylonians did not really, it wasn't really, they weren't certain it was the 9th of Tammuz that the Babylonians breached the wall in Yerushalayim. There was confusion. They
yeah,
didn't know. They actually didn't know what day it was because
right.
there was so much confusion.
There's a
So,
contradiction in two verses. Yeah,
so they pushed it off to the 17th of Thomas. But and back to what I said a few moments ago, there were several things that had happened on the 17th of Thomas through the years, through over a long periods of time that they established as a fast day. Yet, if 17th of Shavuos Thomas falls on a Shabbos, if you can, it's pushed off to Sunday. Pushed off to Sunday. Um,
right. So your
Shavuos
question,
Thomas it can't fall on a Friday, but it can fall on a Shabbos.
right.
So again, you would think because of all the things that happened on that day, that it would also be the Etzem Hayom Hazeh.
Right, right. Okay, it's a good question. Your question is, I mean, we could say the same thing as with Tisha B'Av. Also, both the
Yes.
17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, the Mishnah teaches us five things happen on the 17th of Tammuz, five calamities happen on Tisha B'Av. So for us to say that somehow Asara B'Teves is worse because it's the beginning of this particular calamity, you're saying it's hard to hear that because there's the build all the things that happen on the other days should certainly amount to just as bad that we should even fast on Shabbos. Yeah, it's a fair question. The Chassam Sofer though builds up out the idea a little bit, and he first says, interesting, that he thinks that there is a allusion in the Torah that it's permitted to mourn for the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos. Even though we don't mourn on Shabbos, he thinks there's an allusion in the Torah that you could. Where does he see that? So it has to do with this week's parsha and last week's parsha. In last week's parsha, at the end of Parshas Miketz, so Yosef has not yet revealed himself to his brothers, and they've come back. They've come to Egypt with Binyamin, and he packs them up to leave. And the verse says, "Tavoach tabach v'hachein." Yosef tells his servants to slaughter animals v'hachein and prepare. And the Medrash says that prepare is a reference to prepare for Shabbos for them, like get their food ready for Shabbos, which would mean, and it raises its own questions, that he sent them on their way on Shabbos, which means, though, that they ran after them, they brought them back, and they reunited. Everything that happens in the beginning of this week's parsha, where Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, was on Shabbos. And again, this is going step by step, but it was Shabbos, and it says that Yosef and Binyamin cried over each other, and the Midrash teaches us that they also were crying over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, which they saw, and the Mishkan, which they saw in the future. So says the Chassam Sofer, you have an illusion because you can deduce that it was Shabbos, and they're crying over the Beis Hamikdash. So you see that it's okay to cry over the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos. Okay, but he says, okay, but fine. So then why don't we cry over the Beis Hamikdash on Tisha B'Av on Shabbos? Why is it specifically the 10th of Teves that we will fast on Shabbos, but not Tisha B'Av and not the 17th of Tammuz? So he says that the truth is that, like the Bnei Yissaschar said, the beginning is the worst. Why is the beginning the worst? Because the beginning is just the beginning. It's just the calamity is just getting started. Well, the end, when everything is done, so once you hit rock bottom, you can only go up from there. So in a certain sense, when you have hit the worst part, it's actually a cause for celebration because now you know you can only go up from here. And he says, therefore, um, we see that in a certain way with Rabbi Akiva. Famous Gemara at the end of Makos, where Rabbi Akiva is walking on the Temple Mount with his the destroyed, in the ruins of the Temple Mount, and he's with his colleagues, and they're crying over the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Akiva says no, because you see that if the prophecy that's going to be destroyed is fulfilled, then the prophecy that it will be rebuilt will also be fulfilled. And he sees that as kind of like this is the beginning of the destruction is the beginning of the recovery process. So, so in a certain sense, the worst part is the beginning of the calamity. Once the calamity has come to a conclusion, then you can only go up from there. So the Chassam Sofer says that the calamity began on the 10th of Teves when they laid siege to Jerusalem. It continued until 2 years later. They break through the walls, they destroy the temple on Tisha B'Av, but in a certain sense, that's it. And really, that should be a day of joy because now it can only improve from here. But he says, but it really actually there was still hope because until Gedaliah was killed, they still had hope that they would be able to rebuild it quickly, and Gedaliah had the right connections, and there was still hope of rebuilding immediately. So it was only when Gedaliah was killed that really their hope was diminished. So Tisha B'Av is not really the end of the calamity. Gedaliah's death is the end of the calamity. Now, the truth is, he says, that that's not either the end of the calamity because the people in exile hadn't even heard about the destruction yet. So the real end of the calamity is when the people in the exile hear about the destruction. That's when it's really over. That's when it really is over and it's time to rebuild. It's time to recover. So says the Chassam Sofer, well, Rabbi Gamliel, there was Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel said, no, sorry, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said that we fast on the 5th of Teves because that's the day, the 5th of Teves was the day that the people in the exile heard about the destruction. But Rabbi Akiva would say, no, we don't fast on that day because just like Rabbi Akiva, when he saw the destruction, when he walked by the Temple Mount, when he said, "Oh, this is a sign of hope. This is we see destruction. It's actually the beginning of our recovery process." You don't fast over that. You don't cry over that. You laugh over that. Rabbi Akiva laughed when he saw the destruction. That just as this prophecy became true, so too the prophecy of the rebuilding will come true. So the day that's the end of the calamity, when the people in exile found out about the destruction, according to Rabbi Shimon, that was a day to fast. But according to Rabbi Akiva, that's not a day to fast. So, so you have that the worst is the beginning. That's the 10th of Teves, the beginning of the when they laid siege. That's Asara Teves. That is so that the beginning of the calamity it's just starting to get bad. So that's the day for fasting. That's the worst day that you fast even on Shabbos. The later days, the 17th of Tammuz, the 9th of Av, so and the 3rd of Tishrei, those are the calamity wasn't quite over yet. It hadn't reached its peak, and therefore they're days of mourning. Certainly, they're days of fasting, but they're not so bad that you would fast even on Shabbos. So that's what the Chassam Sofer suggests. Again, it's you can push back and say, well, how do you rate laying siege? How do you put that up against all the terrible things that happened on the 17th of Tammuz, the 9th of Av? It's a fair question, but the Chassam Sofer is trying to explain that the severity of the 10th of Teves is in that it's the beginning of the tragedies, it's the beginning of the calamities, and it only gets worse from there, and therefore it's the worst day, and you fast even if it comes on Shabbos. Okay, now he has another approach though of why you would fast on Shabbos, and and first he wants to suggest why was Rabbi Akiva okay with having the fast days listed out of order chronologically? So again, going back to the verse in Zechariah where it lists the fast days, and it says the fast of the fourth, and the fast of the fifth, and the fast of the seventh, and the fast of the 10th. And according to Rabbi Akiva, it's in order of months, but it's not in order of what actually happened because the last thing listed, the fast of the 10th, was actually the first thing that happened, which was when they laid siege to Jerusalem. That was before they destroyed Jerusalem. So it's out of order. So how could Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon said, well, it's out of order. It's chronologically. So the Gemara said, well, it's the order of the months. But the Chassam Sofer suggests that maybe Rabbi Akiva also understood that the fact that they laid siege wasn't necessarily a calamity until you see what it leads to in the end, the destruction. So in a certain sense, that calamity, that tragedy of the 10th of Teves is only realized, is only actualized once the Beis Hamikdash is actually destroyed, and so it's simultaneously becomes a calamity with the destruction of all hope of for the Beis Hamikdash. And he notes, right? We know that not too long before this, Sennacherib, the king of Ashur, had laid siege to Jerusalem, and his army disappeared in the middle of the night. They got wiped out by a heavenly plague. So, and in fact, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, was scared to lay siege to Jerusalem because he knew what happened to Sennacherib, and and he was nervous. He was afraid that the same thing could happen to him. So, what convinced him? What convinced him? So, the Chassam Sofer brings from Midrashim that the reason why, or one of the reasons why, the Jerusalem was destroyed was because of Chilul Shabbos, because of desecration of Shabbos. And you see this in the prophets. Yirmiyah is warning the people about their desecration of Shabbos, leading up to the destruction. And the Gemara says it, Lo charba Yerushalayim el bnei shechulu bo Shabbosos, that Jerusalem was destroyed because they desecrated Shabbos. So now there's a concept. The Gemara says that one who honors Shabbos, the language of the Gemara is they're giving a nachala bli mitzarim. They're giving an inheritance without boundaries, which needs explanation. Simple understanding is it means a world to come. It's an inheritance without boundaries. They're given nachala bli mitzarim, an inheritance without boundaries. So the Chassam Sofer says, well, then the opposite is true too. If honoring the Shabbos, you're given a reward without boundaries. So by desecrating Shabbos, then boundaries are put on you. And so since the people of Jerusalem were desecrating Shabbos, so they were deserving that there should be boundaries put upon them. A siege could be put on them. And therefore, Nebuchadnezzar was able to lay siege to Yerushalayim successfully because of their desecration of Shabbos. And therefore, specifically, it's the 10th of Teves, which what lent itself, what allowed for the siege to take place was the violation of Shabbos. So therefore, we are willing to recognize that and mourn that even on Shabbos, and specifically Asara B'Teves. This fast can be fasted on Shabbos because it's in recognition of the idea that it was because of the desecration of Shabbos that the siege was allowed to happen in the first place. Again, the Gemara says if you honor the Shabbos, if you engage with Shabbos with pleasure in the right ways, then you're gifted a inheritance without boundaries. But the opposite is true too, that when they desecrate Shabbos, then boundaries are put on them. In this case, literal boundaries, a siege that Nebuchadnezzar put. So that's Chassam Sofer's second approach of why this can be why you would fast even on Shabbos is because it's intertwined specifically with Shabbos, the ability to lay siege on them. Then the Chassam Sofer has a third approach, and the third approach is that there's something more about the 10th of Teves that's different than the later fast days. And he says that the reason why it took so long for the siege to be completed, for them to conquer Jerusalem and destroy the Beis Hamikdash, 2 years plus, he says was because in the heavenly courts, it was being debated whether Yerushalayim should be destroyed or not. Should the Beis Hamikdash, are they deserving? Did they do tshuva? Did they repent enough? And eventually, the decision came down that it should be destroyed. But there was this ongoing debate, questioning whether Jerusalem should be destroyed or not. And he says that there's an idea that every year that the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt, it's as if we destroyed it. If we're not able to have it rebuilt, that means that basically we would have had it destroyed in our generation. And so in a certain sense, he says that each year, come the 10th of Teves, there begins that judgment again. Is this a year that the Beis Hamikdash could be rebuilt? And just like the judgment over Jerusalem began when they laid siege, and it was debated back and forth, beginning on the 10th of Teves, each year that occurs again. And it's almost like it's a day of judgment. It's a Yom Hadin for the Beis Hamikdash. It's a day of judgment whether the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt on the 10th of Teves. And therefore, he says that's why it's okay to fast on that day. Why? Because if the fast is just about something in the past, it's mourning over the Beis Hamikdash, mourning over the destruction, so then you can't fast on Shabbos. We don't just mourn over the past on Shabbos. So Tisha B'Av, the 17th of Tammuz, those fast days are about the past, and therefore you can't fast them on Shabbos. But it's not appropriate to fast on Shabbos. But something that's in the here and now, something that we're sitting in judgment on the 10th of Teves for whether the Beis Hamikdash can be rebuilt in our generation, so that even on Shabbos we could fast for, because that has immediate relevance and application, and therefore it's permitted to fast on Shabbos. So again, very novel approaches to Chassam Sofer, but three reasons why he suggests. And again, it's not necessarily it's not practical because we don't have Shivasar B'Tammuz fall. Sorry, we don't have a Asara B'Teves fall on Shabbos the way our calendar works out. So this is all really hypothetical, conceptual, and trying to understand the uniqueness of the 10th of Teves. But according to the Abu Draham and others, that if theoretically the 10th of Teves could fall on Shabbos, we would fast. What is special about it? So one approach was of the Chassam Sofer, really three approaches in the Chassam Sofer in different places. One is that it's the beginning of the calamity is the worst because it just gets worse from here. The second is that there's a specific connection between Shabbos and the ability of Nebuchadnezzar to lay a siege, that's intertwined together, and as a result of their desecration of Shabbos, and therefore we can mourn it even on Shabbos. And lastly, he says because there's a judgment that happens on the 10th of Teves, and because it's active, and actually the way he says it is, it's an oneg. It's actually gives us pleasure, so to speak, to be able to do something about it. And if fasting is what's needed, then it's not a contradiction to the pleasure of Shabbos to fast on Shabbos if we know that through that we are helping with the rebuilding or getting a good judgment for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash.
Rabbi Shafts,
Yes.
question before we close.
I'm not closing yet.
Okay. Can I just have a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Um, for those people who died in the Holocaust, they don't know exactly their yard site. They died, let's say, in Auschwitz or Bangladesh, and they didn't know, the relatives do not know exactly when they died. Is it true that Sarba Tavis has been assigned as the as a day, a yard site date for individuals who do not know when their relatives actually died during the Holocaust?
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I don't. I mean, I may have heard something about that, but it doesn't ring the bell
Uh,
right off.
I have two relatives who died in Auschwitz, and their family was told, and this is actually from Rabbi Schwab, and the Rabbi
Uh-huh.
Schwab said, "Well, we mark today on Sarba Tavis as the yard site. It's an
Interesting.
arbitrary day."
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Anyway,
Okay.
thank you.
So now there's a little bit more going on in this month than just the 10th of Teves. If you the Torah, which is the sort of the precursor of the Shulchan Aruch, quotes really from Megillas Taanis. Megillas Taanis is the one of the earliest written works, predates the destruction of the temple, I believe. Although there's parts from that before and parts from after. And in general, it records happy days that you're not allowed to fast, and but it also has some days that are fast days, and it gives a list, and it gives the following list. It says that on the 8th of Teves, which would be this Sunday, um, the Torah was translated into Greek, which is a story recorded in a number of places, including in the Gemara and Megillah, and so this what happened was one of the early Greek kings, Ptolemy Talmai, he arranged for a bunch of the sages to gather and he separated them to different rooms and had each one translate the Torah, and miraculously they each translated it the same. That's what we probably what we refer to as the Septuagint when the Torah was translated into Greek, the and it says there in Megillas Taanis, Hayachoshech olam gimel yamim. It brought darkness to the world for 3 days. There's something very terrible about this event. That's on the 8th. Then it says that on the 9th, um, this is what it says there. We don't know what happened. We don't know what happened. The rabbis didn't say what it's about. So we know there's something on the 9th. We don't know what it's about. Now, some say that what it's about is that the 9th of Teves was the birth of the Christian Messiah, and they didn't want to write that there's a fast day because of that, so they just said we don't know what it's about. Although we'll see in a moment that there's a different tradition as to what the 9th is about, and then the 10th is uh, is the day that they laid siege to Jerusalem. So in fact, it's not just the 10th of Teves, but the 8th and 9th are significant. Also, the 8th is the day that um, the Torah was translated into Greek, and the 9th is, again, it says we don't know what, but the commentaries are bothered because we do know what. Because if you look in Slichos that we read on the 10th of Teves, it says what happened on the 9th of Teves, and it says that that's the day that Ezra HaSofer died. Ezra HaSofer was the leader of the Jewish people at the beginning of the Second Temple, and he died on the 9th of Teves. So, okay, so we have on the 8th, they translated the Torah into Greek. On the 9th, Ezra died. And on the 10th they laid siege to Jerusalem. Now, some Sofer attempts to answer why they wrote that they don't know if it seems they knew that it was the day that Ezra died. That we'll leave that question for a different time. But I just wanted to share two thoughts about this: the writing down of the Torah in Greek, and also about Ezra's death. So what was so terrible about writing the Torah down in Greek that it was declared a fast day? And we don't practice this fast day, but it was a fast day at some point, and and there was 3 days of darkness in the world. What's so terrible about writing the Torah into Greek? So, so Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein, in his work on Hanukkah, he says, just to sharpen the question, we know that when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, they translated the Torah into the 70 spoken languages of the time. So we don't seem to have a problem with translating the Torah. So what was so bad, what was so terrible that Talmud, that Ptolemy asked or ordered that the Torah be translated into Greek? So Rabbi Bernstein says as follows. He says that the difference between these different translations, that when they entered the land of Israel and when Talmud ordered it, was the motivation. Although the full depth of the Torah's wisdom is reserved for the Jewish people, but it contains basic important messages for all mankind. For a non-Jew who is seeking the truth, there is much to be learned from the Torah, and to that end it was translated into every existing language when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel. The written Torah can be accessed by the nations of the world. There's what to learn for them. But Greece, however, did not come as seekers of the truth. They came as arbiters of the truth. This means that their goal in having the Torah translated was not for purposes of illumination, but for purposes of evaluation, setting it against their own set of truths that they regarded as sacrosanct and primary. The most that could come out of such an endeavor would be the formatting of the Torah's teachings so that they would either become acceptably brought in line with the prevailing Greek wisdom, or else they would be discarded. Under such conditions, translating the Torah into Greek effectively meant translating Judaism into Hellenism. A day when Greece seeks to illuminate the Torah by detaching it from its source and falsifying its essential message is a day of terrible darkness indeed. So they were not looking to learn from it. They were looking to evaluate it, see how it fit in with their own views. Moreover, as we know, many years later in the events leading up to the miracles of Hanukkah, Antiochus banned the study of Torah outright. This ban did not represent a changing approach to that of Ptolemy. The earlier translation of the Torah into Greek was not an act of endorsing or embracing the Torah, it was an attempt to neutralize it. When the Jewish people insisted in continuing to study the Torah in its original form and for its original purpose, it was declared forbidden. So when Ptolemy wanted to translate the Torah into Greek, that was an attempt to say, listen, this book can join if we approve of it, if we like it, it will join all the other books of Greek wisdom. And if not, then it shouldn't be studied. And the Jewish people, though, were not going to have that, and so they continued to learn the Torah as we have it. And so Antiochus came later and banned the study of Torah outright. But because the purpose of translating the Torah was, as he says, for the purpose of evaluation, for the purpose of aligning it with Greek values, so that was a day of darkness. But there's another approach which is described in different ways by many. I'll just tell you how Rav Moshe Shapiro says it, and he also connects it to the death of Ezra and the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And the basic thread that follows through these 3 days, and I'll try to be quick because I know we're over time, is that all of these three things were a shrinking, a diminishment of holiness and blessing. The Torah in its original form is vast. It's the wisdom of Hashem. It's Shivim Panim. There's 70 angles on it, and once you translate it, then you've now confined it to basically one accepted understanding, and you can no longer darshan. You can't derive things from it anymore. The translation is taking one simple approach and applying it and saying, this is what it is. It almost freezes it. It freezes the Torah, which is really so much more expansive. So to translate the Torah into Greek and say, this is how it should be learned, this is how it should be studied. It's not like our translations where it's an aid. The translation is an aid. But that translation was meant to be a replacement. This is how it should be read. It should join like any other book, and really it's a confinement of what the Torah is and what the and and all the depths of meaning are lost once it's changed into a different language. That's why it was such a calamity. When Ezra died, Rav Moshe Shapiro says that Ezra, he goes with the Gemara, that Ezra was Malachi, which means that he was the last prophet, and so with his death is the end of prophecy. That's also a major diminishment of understanding, of divine connection, and so that's a terrible, we've lost many leaders. Everybody dies eventually, but for the last prophet to die is a fundamental shift in our level of connection and our access to the divine wisdom. So that was a tremendous diminishment, and the destruction of Yerushalayim, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is also obviously a major diminishment of holiness and connection, but it begins with the confinement, with it's almost symbolic. These aren't necessarily his exact words, but seems to be the line of approach he's taking, is that the siege of Jerusalem is basically saying all the holiness and all the everything that emanates from Jerusalem is now going to be confined and eventually destroyed completely. But the siege is the beginning. That's the confinement. So all of these three things represent a diminishment and a confinement. The taking the Torah and in its it's wide like the sea, and then confining it to one Greek translation as is such a diminishment. The all that could be accessed through prophecy and now it's lost is a tremendous diminishment. And the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, all the holiness that emanates from there, the inspiration, the knowledge, the connection, when that gets put under siege, leading to its eventual destruction. So that also is this tremendous diminishment of light, of wisdom, of connection. And that's the thread that runs through these three events that occurred on the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So hopefully we have a slightly deeper understanding of what the 10th of Teves represents. And okay, and that's where we hold.
Thank you, Rabbi.